Young voices filling the MassMutual Center this afternoon with a powerful message on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. We're not leaders of tomorrow. We are leaders right now. Western Mass News reporter Reagan Lockery joins us live in studio with how local youth are taking action to change Springfield today. Reagan?
Yeah, that's right, Chris. Hundreds of young people took the stage today. They told Springfield something important. They're not waiting to make a difference. They're doing it right now. These young voices aren't just celebrating Dr. King's legacy, they're living it. In a city working to heal divisions and build equity, Springfield's youth say they're not waiting for adults to solve the problems. They're stepping up now. On Monday, 12 local organizations brought hundreds of area youth to the MassMutual Center. The event, the Martin Luther King Jr. Day Collaborative's annual celebration. The theme, restoring justice and reclaiming the dream.
I think it's really important to recognize that we, the people, have power, right? We have power to make the decisions for today and to shape our futures. And I think that that's what Dr. King would want us to do, is to stand together in unity, to really think about what is the world that we want to live in. And it's important to help our youth to understand that they are not leaders of tomorrow, they're leaders of today.
Young participants shared letters to Dr. King. They created art about justice, and they made commitments to action. One interactive art installation, Justice Looks Like Me, let attendees show their commitment to justice visually. Kendra Salvador leads the Martin Luther King Jr. Charter School of Excellence in Springfield. Many of her students participated in Monday's event.
We focus on positive character development and making sure that our students really learn what it means to live Dr. King's dream and his values and ideals of the beloved community. So it's something that they're learning about all the time, but in particular with an event like this, it's an opportunity for them to showcase what they've been practicing and learning. And I think now is a time in history where it's more important than ever to celebrate equity.
The Martin Luther King Jr. Family Services is one of the 12 collaborative members. They call themselves Keepers of the Dream. They work year-round to build what Dr. King called a beloved community. Samantha Hamilton represented the Queen's narrative at the event. Her organization uplifts diverse women of color through storytelling and art.
One of the things that we do is bring stories together that uplift diverse women of color, share their perspective through an anthology project, photography, media production, painting, and then create spaces where they can showcase their events in the community. Groups to come share their resources and information. So it's so important for us to be in this room to just share what's available to families.
The message was clear. Springfield's young people aren't waiting for permission to lead. They're reclaiming the dream as we speak. Reporting live in studio, Reagan Lockery for Western Mass News.